don't have books. Pesachim. You have to get a Pesachim book. There's a whole bunch of them back there. So this is our last class on the Gemara, for the Gemara series for this year. And we're going to, Chas v'shalom, Mashiach is not here. You'll still need somebody like me to teach you. We'll be learning the next Mishnah next year, because the rest of the Mishnah really becomes extremely tangential to Passover subjects. But today is kind of we're still on the Pesach subject. We're going to be turning the page today. We're currently on the bottom of page 109. Daf Kuf Tes, Amud Aleph. And the Gemara is going to talk about the measure that is required to fulfill the mitzvah of Arba Kaises, the 4 cups of wine. And I think that before I begin to actually read the Gemara inside, I think I should share a little bit of background with you. And the background is that the Torah and Torah Judaism is a faith system divinely ordained and inspired that's filled with homilies and incredible stories and spirituality and God consciousness and all that other nice stuff that you can find really probably in any faith system or even not in faith systems. But I'm not going to say it's the thing that's unique about Judaism, but it's certainly a unique feature of this spiritual system called Judaism, is the maxim of our sages, Hamaisa hu ha'ikar. The deed is our creed. That's the main thing. The main thing is to do the mitzvah. So if on one hand, you could meditate on matzah and wine all night long, or on the other hand, you can gobble down the matzah and drink the wine and say a few words and have a half-hour makeshift Seder, we would choose option 2. It's better than meditating and ruminating on the mystical messages of matzah and wine, even though the mystical messages are very mystical, very spiritual, very powerful. And truth be told, we should be eating the matzah with all those intentions and all those feelings and all that fervor and all the camaraderie and the good things that come along with the Seder, but that's not what it's about. It's ultimately about fulfilling Hashem's will. So people will say, Rabbi, I'm a very spiritual person. That's very nice. What does that have to do with God? What are you talking about? Spiritual. Isn't spiritual godly? So everything is godly. Nature is godly. The cars are godly. Technology is godly. Everything is godly. What does that mean? Everything is godly. Everything comes from God. God created everything. And the things that we modify is also created by God and continually sustained by God. The spiritual or the non-tangible element of our life is not any closer to God than the physical, tangible elements of life. The most beautiful song is not really any more spiritual than a steak. They're both part of the physical, terrestrial reality that Hashem created us in. So it's not about being a spiritual person. I mean, of course you should be a spiritual person, and you should have a sense of God consciousness pervading all of your actions. Yeah, of course you should be spiritual. But that's not what it's about. It's not about being spiritual. It's about being obedient. It's about doing what Hashem wants. So nasa, which means to do, comes first. And nishma, and study, and understanding, and appreciation, and fervor, and passion, all of that comes second. Because in Judaism, the action required is paramount. Now, because this is the case, because Judaism is in fact primarily and overwhelmingly an action-based system of divine worship, so we're going to have to deal with something called halacha. And halacha is the most important thing. A person wants to convert to become Jewish, and they say, I feel so Jewish. I get emails like this all the time. People watching your classes, I feel Jewish. It's very nice. So what do you need to do to convert, though? Be spiritual, and meditate, and know Jewish history, and speak Hebrew? No, you don't need to do any of those things. You know the one thing you need to do? You need to learn the halacha and do it. And if you don't learn the halacha, you don't know what to do. So you it's not even a question. How could you do it if you don't know what to do? So you have to learn what to do. Leida hamaisa asher yasud. You should know what to do, and then you have to do it. And that's why in Judaism, an enormous emphasis is on halacha. It's on halacha. People say the rabbi is a spiritual leader of his flock, but first and foremost, he has to be a halachist. He has to know a halacha. He has to know be able to tell people what to do. And telling people what to do is equivalent to saying, what does God want me to do now? Does God say this is kosher or not kosher? Does God say this is appropriate or inappropriate? What does the Torah say? What's the halacha? So Judaism is a system of law, divinely ordained laws, sacred laws, holy laws, laws that if we follow, we're connected to Hashem. Now, because this is the case, because we're dealing with bodies of law, we have to have some kind of rigors that the law fits in. Because whenever you have law, you have rigors. You have parameters. You can't have law without parameters. So for example, if we have a law in this country that says you cannot drink while intoxicated, it's a very bad thing to drink, God forbid, when somebody's intoxicated. So there's a law against it. Or there's a law against you shouldn't drive your vehicle too quickly. Okay, it's not as bad as driving intoxicated, probably also not such a good idea. Both of these have to be quantified. So what is called intoxicated? So intoxicated, depends who, depends which person. Some people have enormous capacity for alcohol and they don't get impaired and they're able still to control themselves and they maintain perfect judgment. And some people, they smell a cup of vodka and they're over the hill already. So first of all, you have to have a little seichel, you have to have a little intelligence also. If you know that your judgment is impaired, then you shouldn't be driving. But that's not the point. If we are going to enforce a law, if we make a law that says it's illegal to drive impaired, then we have to then create a parameter for what's called impaired. Who will be the expert? Probably people involved in the medical field, probably people who know the biophysics of alcohol intake and the effects that it has in the bloodstream and when it begins to blur a person's consciousness. And it is true that there might be somebody who will not pass the test. And he actually does have control of his vehicle. It's in theory possible. It's in theory possible that a person will fail the breathalyzer, but he's in control. He's the kind of person who can handle his alcohol so well that nothing bad would happen. And it is distinctly possible that somebody would take a tiny amount of alcohol and they would totally lose control. Now, obviously, if they had an ounce of brains, they wouldn't get behind the wheel. But you wouldn't be able to prosecute them because they didn't technically violate the law. So the law, we cannot have everybody's own law. So, your law! So every single citizen has to register and then he gets his own set of laws written for him. It's a great theory. It's not practical. It's not possible. So what has to happen is the law that speaks for everybody, and we all have to live in accordance with the law. Does that kind of make sense? Makes sense. So in Judaism, if we have all these laws and rigors that we have to adhere to, then there has to be some kind of parameter. There has to be a system of measurement, a system of quantification, a system of being able to ascertain whether something is or isn't what it's purported to be. So one of the things we have to deal with oftentimes is measures. We have to deal with volume, we deal with size. Why do size and weight matter? This is not a fashion statement. Why does volume and length or lack thereof matter? Well, it matters very simply because we have lots of things in Judaism that require items or material. And the items or material have to be a certain size, or else you didn't do it. So you want to do the mitzvah of lulav. Mazel tov, that's great. What do you need? A lulav that's the right size. Oh, Rabbi, stop being silly. Any lulav is good. Well, actually, any lulav is not good. There's halacha. So you want to know? So we have to measure the lulav. Okay, who should we use? Should we use the metric system? Which system should we use? We know today, in the Western world, we're also interconnected, and everybody's essentially a sneeze away from people on the other end of the world through technology. We still have a number of different systems. We have different weighing systems, different measuring systems. So how would we have one ubiquitous system that would bind all of us together? Who would be able to agree on exactly what size is the size? You'd actually manufacture enough rulers and enough scales and make sure that they're distributed far and wide. And what if one of them becomes bent or one of them becomes some way damaged? So then this city all of a sudden has a different measure? We have to find some kind of measure which is ubiquitous. So the Torah actually uses ubiquitous measures. What are two things which are ubiquitous? Anywhere in the world you go, you're going to find them. You're going to find people and you're going to find vegetation. Anywhere in the world you're going to go. So generally people, there's an average size of a fist. Size of a fist is the size of a fist. The size of a finger is the size of a finger. Understandably, there are people with very large fingers. I understand there are people with very small fingers. We actually laugh about that. We say the guy has small hands. Or did you see his fingers? But that's why we notice it, because it's abnormal. But normal, especially males, usually are an average size. So it's an average size, and therefore fingers or fists or a measure of the body is actually one of the methods that's used to measure. What am I talking about? I'm talking about something like an etzba, which is a form of measurement. That's the smallest form of measurement, the diameter of a finger. What's the next thing? A tefach, a fist. What's the next thing? An amma, it's 1.5 feet, size of an arm. And so on and so forth. And how an amma already is less precise because people's arm length varies already. So we say an amma has 6 tefachim. A fist is a fist. A normal size hand is a normal size hand. 6 fists, that's an amma. Make sense? So you want to know how big your lulav is supposed to be? You want to know how big your tzitzit is supposed to be? You want to know how thick your tefillin straps have to be? We have to know these things. There's halachas. It's going to be laws. So the laws have to be governed by a system of measurements. So we have measurements. Then it comes to weight and volume. How do we measure weight and volume? People do definitely not weigh the same. People's fingers don't necessarily weigh the same. What does weigh the same? But what is always the same size? Vegetation. An olive is an olive. A date is a date, a fig is a fig, an egg is an egg. Incredibly, eggs are almost always exactly the same size. Ubiquitously, always the same size. So these are the kind of things you hear about in rabbinic literature and in halacha parlance. You hear about a kizayas. Kizayat means like a zayat. You hear about a kebeya or a kebetza, means like an egg. You hear about a rigors, that means like the size of a dried date. You hear about koiseves, that's the size of a fig, a fresh fig. You hear about a betza. Sorry, we did that already. And so on and so forth. So the measurements are always built around these things. So for example, none of the measurements I mentioned are very large. From the olive to the egg and everything in between. We're not talking about a very large amount. So how do you measure large amounts? How do you measure a mikveh? Well, the answer is very simple. You have a system of measurement, but the system of measurement always begins with a common denominator, which is always the same everywhere. So for example, we say that when it comes to weight, there's something called a saw, and the saw has inside it 6 kavin. And the kav has inside it 4 lugin. And the lug has inside it 6 beitzim. 6 eggs. So now I know. I know that once I have eggs, I put them together. I multiply the eggs. 6 eggs together, that gives me a lug. Then if I have 4 lugin, 4 lugin. Now I have 24 eggs. What do I get? 4 lugin, that gives me a kav. How many kavim do I need? You do the math. 6 kavim. Now I have a saw, and so on and so forth. So sayim. And these are measurements which are throughout the wet length and breadth of halacha. Measurements will show up again and again and again and again. So what are the things we need measurements for? One of the things we're going to need measurements for is this idea that food has to be eaten. It's a mitzvah to eat certain foods. It's a mitzvah to drink certain things. It's a mitzvah to make a bracha before. It's a mitzvah to make a bracha after. All these things have to have measurements. If I tell you have to eat, how much is called eating? In what frame of time is called eating? And then we have a series of time, which I didn't even get into how we measure time, of what basic human interactions. A basic human interaction, like a moment. Time it takes to say, Shalom Aleichem Rabbi. Everybody does that the same. Even the person who speaks Hebrew very fast, the person who speaks Hebrew slow, it's just 3 words. You don't have time really to make a difference. So that's a basic exchange, a greeting. So a greeting is a basic measure of time. That's a moment. A greeting is a moment. And then from there we go. Depends how long. We have this idea of how long it takes the average person to eat a half a loaf of bread. It's called B'chtei Achilas Pras. Then we have the various other things that generally take the same amount. Time now takes to boil an egg. An egg is an egg. You boil an egg, you boil an egg. So that's how we measure time. And therefore, no matter what system we would end up in, and invariably anthropology has its funny way of people evolving into different systems and people adopting different weights and measures, but invariably the Jewish people were always linked together by common halachic weights and measures. Common way of measuring time, common way of measuring volume, a common way of measuring distance or space or size. Usually speaking, we don't have an intersection between the measurement of space, which is long or short, and the measurements of volume. It's not the same kind of volume. Say, how long is a beitza? Is it 2 fingers long or 3 fingers long? I don't know how long a beitza is. We don't measure a beitza is a beitza. How many fingers is a kazayas? How many fists is a kosevis? It doesn't work like that. But this is going to be a rare instance where we're going to have an intersection of the two. And so that's a little bit of a preface to tonight's class. And the last thing I want to tell you about tonight's class is that we're going to be talking about the size which is required for drinking. We're not talking about eating matzah now, we're talking about the mitzvah of drinking wine. The last couple of classes have been all about the consumption of wine because it's a mitzvah ordained by our sages on the night of Pesach to drink 4 cups of wine. So I called it Passover 4x4. And you'll soon see why I did 4x4. Because 4 cups of wine are measured by 4. There's a 4 measurement. It's called etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim, 2 fingers by 2 fingers, which we're soon going to see. The unusual intersection of the different kinds of measurements. We have already learned that the 4 cups of wine have to be drunk as individual cups of wine. We have already learned that the wine that's consumed has to be in the volume of a revi'it. We don't know what that is. We said revi'it. Revi'it comes from the word revi'i, which means 4 or a quarter. It's a quarter of something. So now we're going to find that it's revi'is halug. We don't know what that is yet. Okay? We just learned the Gemara. It's a revi'is. So we have this proverbial revi'is. For all we know, it could be a gallon, it could be a quart. We don't know. Revi'is. It's just language people use, revi'is. So the Gemara at this point has got to quantify it. So how much exactly is a revi'is? And one little important detail. In the Beit HaMikdash, when Moshe Rabbeinu built the first Mishkan, so then Hashem told him to make certain weights and measures. And those measures were called the holy measures. That was the holy form of measuring. It's also known in Talmudic parlance as the desert measures, midbariyos. Why? Because when we came to Jerusalem, we adopted a new system, like a royal metric system. And things were measured in larger number. When we came to Jerusalem, everything was added. There was a 6th added. Not a 6th finger, but everything else was added a 6th. So if something, and the 6th was added, so to speak, on the outside, which means that if you had 5 equal parts, you added an additional equal part. So let's say something was like $100 is made up of 5 20s. So now it wasn't a 20, now it was 120. Which means, of course, that when you have 5 of these measures, what's 5 measures in one system will be 6 measures in the other system. Right? 6 will fit into 5 because there's an additional 6th. So if you have an additional 6th and you have 5 of them, 5 additional 6th, 6 will fit into 5. And that's how it was in Jerusalem for a very long time. And then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and the Sanhedrin at a certain point was headquartered in the north, in the Galilee, in a city called Tzipori. And then in Tzipori, they enhanced the measures yet again. And why they did this is a subject for a different night, but they enhanced the measures again. They added another 6th. Call it inflation, but it's not really that. So now we have 3 measures. We have Midbariyos, which is the desert Moshe Rabbeinu. We have Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi measure, and then we have the Tzipori measure. Now, needless to say, this created a lot of confusion, and it created a lot of challenges for us. So, it created challenges because people living in different places, remember, this is, forget technology, they didn't have a telegraph machine, they didn't even have the normal post office. How are they supposed to be in touch with one another? People grew up, it could be they never left the place, the whole life they never left this place. But they try to keep the halacha. And we know that Jewish people, living apart for centuries, for millennia, had the same halachas. They were eating the same amount of matzah, drinking the same amount of wine. How did they do that? Well, they had Torah. And Torah told them these things. But things have to be established. So this is a little bit of a preface to the Gemara we're going to learn tonight. And the Gemara begins on the bottom of page Kuftes, page 109. Omar Rabbi Yitzhak. Rabbi Yitzhak said the following. Kista de Muriosa. A container for fish brine. So this is once a very popular and common commodity where they would deal in what we call probably schmaltz. You know, people like schmaltz herring. Schmaltz herring is fatty. There's chicken schmaltz, there's even flesh schmaltz, there's schmaltz herring. So the schmaltz herring it's not like schmaltz herring don't swim in a different ocean. They're pickled a certain way with a fatty brine. So murias is this fatty brine. So Rabbi Yitzhak said that there was a certain measure. There was a kista de muriasa da hava betzipori. There was this container of fatty fish brine, also known in Yiddish as schmaltz, that was in this place called Tzipori. Now remember, Tzipori was a very important city for the Jewish people. It was the equivalent of Jerusalem. Not that they had a Beis HaMikdash, but it was the headquarters of the Jewish legal and spiritual reality. Of course, we never forgot Yerushalayim. We always prayed towards Yerushalayim. We always yearned for Yerushalayim, but practically speaking, somebody had a shal in halacha. Where did he go? Where were all the sages? Where was Torah being taught? Where were the big academies? Where were the yeshivot? Everything was at Tzipori. That was our spiritual center. So in this place called Tzipori, where a whole new system of weights and measures was adopted, there was a particular container. And that container was called the schmaltz container. Probably because they sold schmaltz in it. They probably did a lot of other things with it, but it became ubiquitously known as the schmaltz container. So for example, a paper clip is a paper clip. Anywhere in the world, a paper clip is a paper clip. A staple is a staple. There are certain, a can of soda. A can of soda is a can of, actually not Canada and the United States is different. But there are certain, a teaspoon. A teaspoon is a teaspoon. That's what it is. You have to have a fine measure. You have a spoon. A teaspoon is a teaspoon. That's what it is. It's a ubiquitous thing. So they had these containers. For whatever it is, for whatever reason, that's the commodity of schmaltz. That's where it was sold. There were not many animals. There was not that much meat in Eretz Yisrael. Certainly not at the time after the Beis HaMikdash. Tremendous poverty. Some chicken. And there was a lot of fish. Once upon a time you see a lot of fish. Like in Europe they ate a lot of fish. Why? Because that's all they could afford. Schmaltz herring was like some kind of, like roast beef today. For Shabbos, you had a piece of herring. So this is a commodity, a very, very popular commodity, an affordable commodity, a commodity that this is people are all familiar with. And it was sold in a certain capsule, a certain container. So the capsule in Tzipori that they used to sell this fish brine, so Rabbi Yitzhak said, Have kimin luga de migdasha. This was like the lug of the Beis HaMikdash. And because it was the log of the Beis HaMikdash, what does that do for us? We're looking for a revius. Now you're giving me a lug? So the Gemara says, Uba misharin revius shel Pesach. That's how we measure the revius of Pesach, the size of the Pesach. Why? Let's take a look in Rashbam. Rashbam says, Kista de Muriosa, Mida Shemoichen Baha Murius. This was the measure in which the Murius, the schmaltz, was sold. Uba misharin revius shel Pesach. Shemimale Moisi, says Rashbam, it was filled. And then you took the material, the liquid that was contained in this that was in this container, and you divided it into 4 equal parts. And if you divide it into 4 equal parts, I have exactly as much wine as you need for the Seder. So somebody wants to know, how much wine do I need for the Seder? The answer is, how many people do you have? Oh, how many people? I'm having 10 people for my Seder. The answer was, get 10 kista de muriasas of wine. Because if you have 10 kista de muriasas of wine, we know with certainty that each person has to drink a kista de muriasa because it's got a lug, and a lug is made up of 4 revius, 4 quarters, and each glass of wine has to be 1/4 a revius. All right. This is what Rabbi Yitzhak said. Why did Rabbi Yitzhak use this example? Because it was an exact measure. It was very, very common and easily available. In his time, everybody knew what it was. So that was a perfect way to describe the measure during a tumultuous period when people no longer had the Beis HaMikdash and no longer necessarily had these measures as ubiquitously anymore. Everybody was living their own life, doing their own thing. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, who lives at a later time, he says, no. He says, this is what we're going to need to do. He says, Tamniyaisa kadmaisa have betveria. So the tamyaisa is a certain measure. And Rashbam says Tam Yaisa is a midah, a measure. Vahainu Tomon. This is called the Tomon and the Uchla that we find in Mesechet Sota. Now, there's a lot of Rishonim who disagree with that, but at any rate, let's just say Tam Yaisa. I don't know how to translate Tam Yaisa. Tam Yaisa. Tam Yaisa was a measure, whatever that is. It was some kind of probably 8, something with 8. Like so the 8 ball was some kind of 8. I don't know. Because Tamni is 8. So Tamniaisa, Kademaisa, the Have Tiveria. Tiveria was also in the north. We know that after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Judea was eventually razed entirely by the Romans. Every single tree uprooted. It was a desolate wasteland. Nobody lived there. Where did the Jewish people live? They moved north. They found refuge in the north. It's interesting because the first Beis HaMikdash, the north was destroyed. And everybody stayed in the south. And then the second Beis HaMikdash, the south was totally destroyed, so they went north. And that's where the Jewish community lived, the Galilee. Galilee Elyon, Galilee Tachten, Upper Galilee, Lower Galilee. That's where our people lived. Much of what's called Lebanon today, by the way, is the Galilee. Parts of Syria are the Galilee. That's where Jews lived. So, after the period of Tiveria, of Tzipori, Rabbi Yochanan is the last of the Tanoim, first of the Amoraim. He's living in a later time. I guess in his time, the schmaltz herring wasn't so popular anymore, or that wasn't so widely known. So he says Tiveria was the big city. That was the last place the Sanhedrin convened. It was in Tiveria that they disbanded. So at a later time, Rabbi Yochanan said that the old Tamyaisa that was in Tiveria, Havas Yesera Alda Revia. It's larger than the Tamyaisa we use now by exactly a Revius. Oba Mishar and Revius for Pesach. So you want to know how much is a Revius for Pesach? Simple solution. You're going to take a Tamyaisa, the old Tamyaisa, and then you're going to take a new Tamyaisa. And then you're going to empty whatever you have from the old Tamyaisa into the new Tamyaisa. And then there's going to be some leftover. And that leftover is exactly a Revius. In plain English, the difference between the large Tamyaisa and the small Tamyaisa is a Revius. How would people know? Simple. Take this cup, fill that one up, the amount that's left there, that's a Revius. Simple. He gave everybody an easy, ubiquitous way to do this. Remember, everybody's got to do this. This is not experts, culinary experts only. This is not scientists. This is not people who are in some way professionals in measuring. Everybody, every from the biggest schlepper or schlemazel to the most sophisticated and talented person. Everybody's got to have the 4 cups. It had to be a weight. It's easy for people to measure. So this is the measure. That's the measure. That's the modicum amount. Now, in our day and age, our poskim have analyzed these things and analyzed them, and they've come up with approximations of what we think it is. And in case you think we're certain, think again. There's the famous shiurim is the shir of Reb Chaim Noah, who most of us follow. And then there are some who follow the shir of the Chazon Ish, which is based on the lumdus, on the